I always thought my life with Clara was unshakable, a fortress built on trust and quiet routines. We'd been married 12 years, living in a modest house on the edge of Portland, where the rain painted our windows most nights. I'm Ethan, a structural engineer by trade, someone who calculates load-bearing walls and stress points for a living. Precision is my language. Clara, she was the opposite. A painter, all wild strokes and impulsive laughter, her canvases spilling color across our hardwood floors. We balanced each other, or so I believed. Our days were predictable. Coffee at dawn, her humming in the studio, me sketching blueprints at my desk. It was a rhythm I cherished. That rhythm cracked on a Tuesday in late February. I'd come home early, a canceled meeting leaving me with an unexpected pocket of time. The house smelled of turpentine and something else. Cologne, sharp and unfamiliar. Clara's studio door was ajar, and I heard voices. Not just hers, but a man's, low and conspiratorial. I froze, my hand on the banister, listening as her laugh, usually so light, took on a jagged edge. "He won't suspect a thing," she said, and the words hit me like a beam snapping under too much weight. I edged closer, peering through the gap. There she was, her auburn hair loose, leaning into a man I recognized instantly. Marcus Reed, the local art gallery owner. His hand rested on her waist, casual but possessive, and she didn't pull away. I didn't storm in. I'm not built for theatrics. Instead, I retreated to the garage, my mind racing through calculations. Marcus wasn't just some stranger. He'd been at our dinners, our gallery outings, smiling at me over glasses of wine while complimenting my wife's talent. The betrayal wasn't just hers. It was his, too. A double fracture in the foundation I'd trusted. I sat there, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, replaying every moment I'd missed. Her late nights at the studio, the sudden inspiration trips to the coast, the way she'd started locking her phone. The signs were there, but I'd been too busy reinforcing our life to see the cracks. That night, I didn't confront her. I cooked dinner, salmon, her favorite, and watched her across the table, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. She talked about her latest painting, a chaotic swirl of reds and blues, and I nodded, pretending the world hadn't shifted beneath me. But inside, I was designing something new, not a building, but a plan. A revenge so precise, so cold, it would leave her shattered without me ever raising my voice. The next week, I became an observer in my own life. Clara moved through our house like nothing had changed, her paint-stained fingers brushing my arm as she passed, her smile still warm. But I saw it now, the performance. Every gesture was a brushstroke on a canvas of lies. I started tracking her, not out of desperation but curiosity, like an engineer studying a structure before demolition. She met Marcus 3 more times that week, always under the guise of gallery business. I followed once, parking my truck a block away from his sleek downtown loft, watching her slip inside as the streetlights buzzed overhead. They didn't even bother closing the blinds. I needed more than suspicion, though. I needed evidence, something tangible to anchor my spiraling thoughts. So I turned to her studio. She'd always been territorial about it, claiming it was her sacred space. But that didn't stop me. Late one night, while she slept, I crept in, the floorboards creaking under my weight. Her latest canvas dominated the room. A tangle of limbs and shadows, unmistakably human, unmistakably intimate. It wasn't abstract. It was them. My stomach churned, but I kept searching. In a drawer, beneath tubes of paint, I found a sketchbook. Page after page of pencil drawings. Marcus reclining shirtless, his smirk captured in graphite. Clara's hands tracing his outline, their bodies entwined in ways I couldn't unsee. She turned her betrayal into art. That wasn't the worst of it. Tucked between the pages was a note, scrawled in Marcus's jagged handwriting. "When he's gone, it's just us. Patience, darling, gone." The word echoed in my skull. Were they planning to leave me, humiliate me, or something darker? I didn't know yet, but it fueled me. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands steady despite the storm inside. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a deliberate unraveling of my life, and I wouldn't let it stand. Back in my office, I started sketching not blueprints but a timeline. Their meetings, her lies, the gallery's schedule. Marcus was hosting an exhibition in 2 weeks, a big event Clara had been buzzing about. It would be public, crowded, perfect. I remembered something from my engineering days. Stress points aren't just physical. People have them too: pride, reputation, trust. I'd find theirs and press until they buckled. Clara loved her art more than anything, even me, it seemed. Marcus thrived on his image, the cultured tastemaker. I'd strip them both bare, but not with fists or shouts. My revenge would be a slow collapse, elegant and irreversible. Clara noticed a shift in me, though I masked it well. "You're quiet lately," she said one morning, stirring cream into her coffee, her eyes searching mine. I shrugged, told her work was heavy. Bridges don't design themselves. She bought it, or pretended to, and went back to humming. But I wasn't quiet out of sadness. I was focused, drafting the first phase of my plan. Revenge, I realized, isn't about heat, it's about pressure applied at just the right angle. I'd make them feel it without ever knowing I'd pulled the lever. I started with Marcus. His gallery, Reed's vision, was his kingdom, a glass-walled shrine to his ego. I dug into him online, cross-referencing posts, reviews, anything I could find. He'd built his reputation on discovering raw talent, Clara being his latest muse. But there were whispers. A sculptor from Tacoma claimed he'd stolen her work years back, passing it off as his find. A painter in Seattle hinted at unpaid commissions. Nothing concrete, just cracks in his polished facade. I filed it away, knowing I'd need more. Then came the unusual piece, the betrayal I hadn't expected. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled guy named Paul who smelled like cigars and skepticism. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. Follow Clara, document her movements. 2 days later, he called me to a diner across town, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photos, grainy but unmistakable. Clara and Marcus, yes, but not alone. In one shot, they were with a woman, tall, blonde, her hand on Clara's arm as Marcus grinned. Another showed the three of them entering a hotel, Clara's head tilted back in laughter. Paul leaned back, chewing a toothpick. "Your wife's got eclectic taste," he said, no judgment, just fact. I stared at the images, recalculating. This wasn't just Marcus. It was a triangle, a web I hadn't seen coming. The woman was Lena Hart, a performance artist Marcus had discovered last year. Clara had gushed about her once, calling her fearless. Now I saw why. The betrayal wasn't singular. It was layered, a performance of its own. My chest tightened, but I didn't crumble. Instead, I thanked Paul and drove home, the envelope burning a hole in my passenger seat. Clara wasn't just unfaithful. She was reinventing herself, shedding me like an old skin. But I'd used that against her. The gallery exhibition loomed, a glittering deadline for my plan. I spent days dissecting their world. Clara, Marcus, Lena. The photos gnawed at me, but they also clarified things. This wasn't about passion. It was about power, a twisted game they played together. Clara's art, Marcus's influence, Lena's edge. They fed off each other, leaving me as collateral damage. I turned that game inside out. I started small, planting seeds. Marcus's gallery had a sleek website, all minimalist design and glowing testimonials. I created a few anonymous accounts on local art forums, dropping subtle questions. Asterisk, anyone else think Reed's vision overpromises? Heard rumors about unpaid artists. Asterisk, nothing accusatory, just enough to stir curiosity. Within days, a few voices chimed in. Disgruntled creators, collectors with vague complaints. The chatter grew, a low hum beneath his pristine image. Clara didn't notice, too busy prepping her paintings, but I saw Marcus's name trending on X, the first ripples of doubt. Next, I turned to Lena. She was less guarded. Her life splashed across social media. Cryptic posts, selfies with Clara, hints of their collaboration. I dug deeper, finding an old interview where she bragged about living without boundaries. It gave me an idea. I contacted a friend, Jake, who ran a small press outfit. Hypothetical question, I said. Could you mock up a flyer, edgy but vague, about an art scandal? He laughed, agreed, no questions asked. 2 days later, I had it. A black and white sheet, grainy photos of Lena and Clara clipped from Paul's stash, overlaid with text. Asterisk art or deception? The truth behind Reed's vision. Asterisk no names, just insinuation. I mailed copies to local critics and signed, letting their imaginations do the rest. Clara came home late that night, her cheeks flushed, talking about the exhibition's energy. I listened, nodding while my mind worked. She mentioned Lena casually, such a free spirit, and I smiled, agreeing. She had no idea I'd seen them together. No clue I was pulling strings. The flyers wouldn't hit yet, but when they did, the pressure would mount. Marcus's ego would take the first hit, then Clara's pride. Lena, I figured, would squirm under scrutiny. They'd turn on each other, I just had to wait. The day before the exhibition, I tested the waters. Clara was frantic, packing her canvases into crates, her hair tied back with a scarf. Marcus says this could be my breakthrough, she said, her voice bright with ambition. I offered to help, carrying a crate to her car, and asked, offhand, Lena's performing too, right? Quite the trio you've got. Her hands paused, just for a second, before she laughed it off. Yeah, she's intense. Adds flair. I didn't push, but I saw the flicker. Guilt, maybe, or fear. She knew I wasn't blind, even if she thought I was clueless. That night, I finalized phase 1. The flyers had landed. 2 critics posted about disturbing rumors on X, tagging the gallery. Marcus responded with a slick denial, calling it petty jealousy. But the damage was there. I watched Clara scroll her phone, her brow furrowing, though she said nothing to me. Meanwhile, I'd sent Paul back out. He returned with audio this time. A recording from a cafe where Clara, Marcus, and Lena met. Their voices were hushed but clear. Marcus saying, Ethan's oblivious, we're fine. Clara replying, he's too predictable. Lena laughing, poor guy doesn't deserve this. The casual cruelty of it burned. But I stayed calm. Predictable, huh? I'd show them predictable. I leaned into my engineering roots, treating this like a project. Stress points identified. Marcus's reputation, Clara's art, Lena's bravado. Load applied, rumors, flyers, doubt. Now, the exhibition would be the breaking point. I RSVP'd to the event, telling Clara I'd be there to support her. She beamed, oblivious to the trap. I wasn't just attending, I was bringing something with me. Not a weapon, not a scene, but a reveal so sharp it had cut through their little world. They'd built this betrayal together. I'd dismantle it the same way, piece by calculated piece. The exhibition night arrived like a storm front, heavy with anticipation. Clara fluttered around the house in a black dress, her excitement palpable, oblivious to the weight I carried. I dressed carefully, gray suit, crisp shirt, projecting the steady husband she expected. But in my briefcase, locked tight, was my leverage. Paul's photos, the audio file on a USB, and a stack of those flyers, now printed on thicker stock for impact. I wasn't planning a public tantrum. That's not my style. I'm an engineer. My work is subtle, structural, devastating in its quiet. We drove to Reed's Vision in silence, the city lights smearing across the windshield. The gallery glowed ahead, all glass and sharp angles, packed with Portland's art crowd. Critics in turtlenecks, collectors sipping champagne, artists posturing for attention. Marcus greeted us at the door, his handshake firm, his smile ablade. Ethan, good to see you supporting Clara, he said, voice smooth as oil. I nodded, letting him think I was still the oblivious fool. Lena hovered nearby, her blonde hair a stark slash against her red jumpsuit, her eyes darting to Clara with a knowing glint. The 3 of them together radiated a smug energy, a closed circuit I'd soon overload. Clara's paintings lined the walls, bold, chaotic swirls that drew gasps from the crowd. I recognized the one from her studio, the tangled limbs now framed in gold, titled Union of Shadows. The irony wasn't lost on me. As she mingled, basking in praise, I moved through the room, a ghost with a purpose. I slipped a flyer into a critic's coat pocket, another under a champagne tray. Small moves, barely noticeable, but they'd spread. Then I found my target, the gallery's sound system, tucked behind a curtain near the stage. Marcus always played ambient music at these events. Tonight, I'd rewrite the playlist. I waited until the speeches began. Marcus took the mic, waxing poetic about visionary talent, gesturing to Clara and Lena like they were his trophies. The crowd applauded, and I slipped the USB into the audio console, overriding the feed. At first, no one noticed. The music faded, replaced by static, then voices. Clara's laugh, Marcus's arrogance, Lena's taunt. Poor guy doesn't deserve this. The room stilled, heads turning as the recording looped, their casual betrayal laid bare. Clara's face drained of color, Marcus fumbled the mic, and Lena glared into the crowd, searching for the source. I stood back, arms crossed, watching the first cracks split their facade. Panic rippled through the gallery like a shockwave. Marcus barked at a staffer to cut the sound, but the damage was done. The audio had played twice before silence fell. Whispers replaced applause, eyes darting between Clara, Marcus, and Lena. I stayed in the shadows, my heart steady despite the chaos I'd unleashed. Clara clutched her wine glass, scanning the room, and for a moment, our gazes locked. Did she suspect me? I couldn't tell. Her expression was a mask of confusion and dread. Good. Let her squirm. Marcus recovered first, stepping back to the mic with a forced laugh. Technical glitch, folks, apologies. Let's focus on the art. But the mood had shifted. Critics huddled, murmuring. A woman in a fur stole slipped a flyer from her purse, frowning as she read. I'd scattered just enough to ignite curiosity. By morning, the art blogs would be buzzing. Clara excused herself, disappearing toward the back, and I followed at a distance. She ducked into a storage room, Lena close behind, their voices hushed but sharp. What was that? Lena snapped. Someone knows, Clara hissed. I leaned against the wall outside, listening, my briefcase still heavy with ammo. Back in the main room, Marcus worked the crowd, his charm fraying. I approached a critic I recognized, Janine Voss, a sharp-tongued writer for Artpulse. Quite a night, I said casually, handing her a flyer I'd found on a table. She skimmed it, her lips pursing. This reeks of sabotage. Reed's got enemies. I shrugged, playing the concerned husband. Clara's shaken. Hope it doesn't overshadow her work. Janine nodded, already typing on her phone. Seed planted. I drove Clara home later, her silence thick with tension. Rough night, I ventured, testing her. She muttered something about equipment failures, her hands twisting in her lap. I let it drop, but inside I was calculating the next move. The audio was a jab, public, humiliating, but not the knockout. That required something personal, a betrayal mirrored back at them. Clara's art was her soul. Marcus's gallery, his throne. Lena's persona, her shield. I'd strip all three, using their own tools against them. The fallout hit fast. By morning, X was alight with speculation. #ReadsVision trending alongside blurry screenshots of the flyers. Janine's blog post dropped at noon. Scandal Shadows exhibition. Is Marcus Reed's empire crumbling? She mentioned the audio, the mysterious photos, hinting at a love triangle without naming names. Clara paced the kitchen, phone in hand, her calm unraveling. This is a disaster, she said, more to herself than me. I brewed coffee, offering bland sympathy. It'll blow over. She didn't notice my detachment, too lost in her own panic. I spent the day refining phase 2. Paul had dug deeper into Lena, uncovering a gem. She'd been sued 2 years back for plagiarizing a performance piece. The case settled quietly, but the original artist's blog still fumed online. I emailed the woman, anonymously, suggesting she revisit her grievance, attaching a flyer for context. Meanwhile, I tapped an old college buddy, Sam, who ran a print shop. Need a favor, I said. "Can you mock up some canvases? Specific style." He agreed, no questions, trusting my specs. I sent him Clara's sketches of Marcus and Lena, the ones from her secret book, with instructions to scale them up. Life-sized, raw, unmistakable. Marcus called Clara that afternoon, his voice audible through her phone on speaker. "We need to meet. Damage control." She glanced at me, hesitating, then said, "Ethan's here." He paused, then, "Bring him. He's family." The gall of it almost made me laugh. I nodded, playing along, and we met them at a dim bar downtown. Marcus looked haggard, Lena defiant, Clara brittle. They spun a story, rival artists, jealous exes, but I saw the cracks. Lena snapped at Marcus. "You said this was airtight." Clara flinched. I sipped my beer, silent, letting them fray. That night, I uploaded a distorted clip of the audio to X from a burner account, tagged with #ArtLies. It spread like wildfire, amplifying the chaos. Clara cried herself to sleep, and I lay beside her, awake, plotting. The canvases would arrive soon, my cruelest stroke yet. Sam delivered the canvases 2 days later, wrapped in brown paper, dropped off at my office to avoid Clara's eyes. I unrolled them in private, the sketches now towering. Marcus lounging, Lena entwined with Clara. Every line a betrayal in stark acrylic. They were perfect, her style, her secrets, blown up for the world. I'd unveil them, but not yet. Timing was everything. The gallery was reeling. Marcus issuing denials online. Lena posting cryptic rants about haters. Clara stayed home, claiming a migraine, her phone buzzing nonstop. I played the dutiful husband, bringing her tea, watching her crumble. The plagiarism story broke that afternoon. The artist I'd tipped off went public, naming Lena in a scathing post with old court docs. X erupted, dragging Marcus into it by association. Clara read the thread aloud, voice trembling. "This can't be true." I murmured agreement, hiding my satisfaction. The pressure was working. They were turning inward, suspecting each other. Paul confirmed it with a new recording. Marcus and Lena arguing outside the gallery, blaming Clara for loose ends. She'd become their liability, just as I'd planned. I escalated that night, mailing the canvases to Janine Voss with a note. "And signed works from Reed's Circle, truth or fiction?" She'd run with it, I knew. Her nose for scandal was sharp. Meanwhile, I visited the gallery after hours, slipping inside with a copied key from Clara's purse. In the storage room, I swapped one of her exhibit pieces, a serene landscape, for a smaller canvas Sam had rushed. Marcus's face, smug and bare, from her sketchbook. It'd be found eventually, a quiet gut punch for Marcus alone. Clara confronted me that evening, eyes wild. "Are you doing this?" she demanded. I met her gaze, calm as steel. "Doing what?" She faltered, backing off, but the seed of doubt was there. I'd let her wonder, her guilt would do the rest. Janine's next article hit like a sledgehammer, and signed canvases reveal intimate secrets at Reed's vision. She'd photographed my deliveries, the giant sketches now online, pixelated just enough to dodge lawsuits but clear enough to ruin. The comments exploded, disgust, fascination, calls for answers. Clara saw it first, her scream echoing from the living room. She shoved her laptop at me, the images glaring back. Her art, her lovers, her shame. "Who did this?" she yelled, tears streaking her face. I stared, feigning shock. "I don't know, Clara. This is awful." Marcus called an emergency meeting at the gallery, and I insisted on driving her there. He was a wreck, hair disheveled, voice hoarse, ranting about sabotage. Lena paced, accusing him of leaking the sketches to save himself. Clara sat mute, hands trembling. I played the peacemaker, suggesting they ride it out, knowing they wouldn't. The swapped canvas had been found. Marcus paled when a staffer mentioned it, his private humiliation complete. No one suspected me. They were too busy clawing at each other. Back home, Clara locked herself in her studio, emerging hours later with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the first crack in her armor. I nodded, letting her stew in it. The gallery's reputation tanked. Cancellations poured in, artists pulling their work. Lena fled town, her social silent. Marcus faced a lawsuit from the plagiarized artist, his empire buckling. My revenge wasn't done, though. The final blow would be Clara's alone, a mirror of her betrayal, cruel in its intimacy. I slept soundly that night, the blueprint nearing completion. Clara's apology lingered in the air, a fragile thread I didn't pull. Not yet. She spent the next day in a haze, drifting between the studio and the couch, her phone silent for once. The gallery scandal had metastasized. Marcus's denials only fanned the flames, and Lena's disappearance left Clara as the last pillar standing, albeit barely. I watched her unravel, my face a mask of concern, while inside I tightened the screws of my plan. Revenge wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own choices, to see her world collapse under her own brushstrokes. I started with her art, the core of her identity. She'd always said painting was her escape, her truth. Now it'd be her cage. I'd kept one of Sam's canvases, the largest, Clara and Lena tangled in a raw, unfiltered embrace. Hidden in my truck. Late that night, while she slept fitfully, I carried it to the garage, setting up a workbench. With a scalpel and steady hands, I altered it. Not much, just enough. I painted over Lena's face with Clara's own, a mirror image of betrayal, then added a title in her bold script. Self-portrait of deceit. It was her style, her hand, her soul turned against her. The next morning I called Marcus. His voice was ragged, desperate. "Ethan, you've got to help. Clara's the only one who can fix this." I agreed, calm as ever, and suggested a private showing to salvage their reputations. A lie, but he bit. I told Clara it was his idea, a chance to reclaim her narrative. She hesitated, then nodded, clinging to the hope of redemption. I drove her to the gallery, the altered canvas concealed in a crate. Marcus met us at the door, hollow-eyed, muttering about loyalty. I carried the crate inside, placing it near the main wall, and excused myself to grab something from the car. I didn't return, not yet. From across the street, I watched through the gallery's glass facade. Clara unveiled the canvas, expecting one of her originals. Her gasp was audible even from my distance as the crowd, critics, a few die-hard collectors, fell silent. Marcus froze, staring at the painting. Clara with Clara, a twisted reflection of her infidelity. Whispers turned to murmurs, then open speculation. She bolted from the room, Marcus trailing, their voices lost to the hum of judgment. I'd given them a stage and they'd performed my script perfectly. Clara didn't come home that night. She texted once, "Need space," and I let her have it, knowing she'd run to Marcus or some hotel, anywhere but here. The gallery event made waves online. X lit up with photos of the canvas, hashtags like #self-deceit trending. Critics called it brilliant and disturbing, debating if it was intentional. I stayed offline, letting the storm rage, my role still invisible. Marcus issued a statement claiming it was unauthorized, but no one bought it. His credibility was ash. I spent the day dismantling our life, not with shouting or smashing, but precision. I packed Clara's paints, brushes, and sketchbooks into boxes, labeling them with her name in Sharpie, clinical, detached. Her studio became a sterile shell, the walls bare save for a single photo I pinned up. Us on our wedding day, smiling, a relic of what she'd torched. Then I called a locksmith, changing every lock on the house. She'd find no sanctuary here when she returned, if she returned. My phone buzzed with her calls by evening, but I let them ring, each unanswered tone a brick in the wall I was building. Paul dropped by, uninvited, with a final report. "She's at the coast," he said, sliding me a photo of Clara on a windswept beach, alone, staring at the waves. "Marcus is done. Gallery's closing next week." I nodded, tipping him extra. Her isolation was fitting. She chased freedom with them. Now she had it, cold and empty. That night, I slept in our bed, hers now a memory, dreaming of load-bearing beams snapping under strain. The canvas had been my fulcrum, The rest was gravity. She showed up the next afternoon, bedraggled, key useless in her hand. "Ethan, let me in," she pleaded through the door. I opened it, face blank. "Your things are in the garage. Take them and go." Her eyes widened, searching for the man she'd known, but I was steel now, unyielding. She didn't fight, just grabbed the boxes and left, her sobs echoing down the drive. Phase 3 complete. Clara's departure didn't end it. Revenge, I'd learned, isn't a single blow. It's a sequence, each step amplifying the last. Marcus was next, his ruin already underway but incomplete. I cracked his empire. Now I'd bury it. I dug into his finances, using public records and a favor from a friend at City Hall. The gallery lease was month to month, propped up by loans he couldn't repay with his reputation in tatters. I tipped off a local realtor, anonymous, of course, suggesting the space was available soon. By week's end, a for lease sign hung in the window, Marcus oblivious until it was too late. I didn't stop there. His car, a vintage Porsche he flaunted, caught my eye. I'd seen it parked outside the gallery, a symbol of his swagger. A quick chat with a mechanic buddy revealed its weak spot. An old fuel line, prone to leaks. I didn't tamper with it, too crude, but I mailed Marcus a forged inspection notice, claiming urgent repairs or face impoundment. He'd ignore it, I knew, too arrogant to care. Sure enough, 2 days later, X-Post showed the Porsche towed, Marcus fuming on the curb. Small, petty, but it stung. Lena surfaced then, unexpectedly. She'd fled to Seattle, but a friend sent me a link, her new performance. A rant about betrayal, projected on a warehouse wall. She named Clara and Marcus, painting herself as the victim. I smiled, her ego was my ally now. I sent the clip to Janine Voss, who ran a follow-up. Lena heart bites back, triangle implodes. The article quoted Clara's self-portrait, tying her to the mess irrevocably. She'd never paint again without that shadow. Clara called that night, voice broken. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean..." I cut her off. "You did. Live with it." I hung up, her words fuel for the final act. She'd feel this forever, but I wasn't done twisting the knife. The house felt lighter without Clara, a structure cleansed of rot. I kept busy, redesigning the garage into a workshop, sketching bridges for a new contract. But the plan hummed beneath it all, nearing its cruelest edge. Clara's art career was dead, Marcus's gallery shuttered, Lena's reputation a punchline. Yet I wanted one last fracture, something personal. A betrayal reflected back at Clara in a way she'd never escape. I remembered her sketchbook, those intimate drawings I'd photographed. She'd left it behind, buried in a box. I pulled it out, flipping through pages of Marcus and Lena, her obsession captured in graphite. Then I found it. A self-portrait, unfinished, her face soft with longing. I took it to Sam, asking for one final canvas. Not large but exact, her style mimicked to perfection. He added a twist at my request. Her reflection split, one half smiling with Marcus, the other with Lena, both gazing at a faded Ethan in the background. Titled What Was Lost, it was her confession, her mirror, her punishment. I mailed it to her, no note, just the return address of my house. She'd know. Days later, a mutual friend mentioned seeing Clara at a diner. The canvas propped beside her, her eyes hollow. She wouldn't talk, he said, just stared at it. I pictured her there, trapped in her own art, the weight of her choices crushing her. Marcus had lost his kingdom, Lena her spotlight, but Clara's loss was deeper. Her soul, laid bare and rejected. I checked X one last time. The scandal had faded, replaced by fresher gossip, but their names lingered in obscure threads, tainted forever. My revenge was complete. Not loud, not violent, but a slow, deliberate collapse. I'd used their strengths against them, turned their triangle into rubble. The house was mine again, quiet, stable. I poured a whiskey, toasted the silence, and moved on. Weeks passed, the dust settling like concrete over a finished build. Clara vanished from Portland. Rumor said she'd moved east, chasing a fresh start no one believed she'd find. Marcus sold his Porsche to cover debts, the gallery space now a yoga studio, his name erased. Lena popped up occasionally online. Her art dismissed as derivative, her fire snuffed out. I dismantled them, piece by piece, without ever raising my voice. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not exactly, but a cold clarity, a project closed. I rebuilt my life with the same precision. The house transformed, studio gutted, walls repainted, every trace of Clara scrubbed away. I took on bigger contracts, bridges spanning rivers, my name in trade journals. Friends asked about her, but I deflected, letting them assume a quiet split. No one knew the architect behind their fall, and I preferred it that way. Anonymity was my strength, the shadow where I thrived. One evening, a package arrived, small, unmarked. Inside was a sketch, Clara's hand unmistakable. Me, alone, my face carved with lines she'd never seen before. No note, just the drawing, a final plea or confession. I studied it, tracing the familiar strokes, then fed it to the fireplace. The flames ate her last offering, curling it to ash. She tried to reach me to reclaim something, but I was beyond her now, a structure she couldn't breach. Spring came, rain softening to mist. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up. The betrayal had been a fault line, splitting my life open, but I'd reinforced it, stronger than before. Clara, Marcus, Lena, they'd built their tower on sand, and I'd let it fall, guiding the collapse with an engineer's eye. Cruel? Maybe. But they'd chosen the game. I just played it better. The horizon stretched ahead, clean and unburdened, and I stepped into it, leaving their ruins behind.